Welcome back to the Turtle Optimist podcast. Today we're diving into a story of incredible patience, perseverance, and the power of a dream long held. Our guest today has a truly unique story, an idea that simmered, evolved, and finally blossomed into a book after 15 to 20 years of quiet contemplation. We'll be exploring the journey from the initial spark of inspiration to the final tangible product. What kept the flame alive for so long? What challenges did she face in finally bringing it to life? And what wisdom can we glean from this extraordinary act of creative endurance? Get ready to be inspired by a story of dedication and the slow, beautiful process of bringing a long-held vision into reality. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, Betsy. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thanks. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah. Before we get started to talk about your journey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, my name is Betsy Thomason, executive assistant by day in a consulting company. I really enjoy working for, and artist, dancer, and writer by night.
Mm, wonderful. Sounds like a busy life. Yes,
It is.
good. Good. So, we're going to talk today about you becoming an author. And I'm really intrigued by this topic because I keep saying, like, I want to write a book, and other people say,
Mm.
you should write a book. So, I just want to like learn from you and just,
Mm.
for you to tell us all the things. So, let's start off with you had mentioned to me that you had this idea of a book and it evolved over time and it started in your 30s and 40s. So I'm wondering what the initial spark was that planted the seed for your project and how did that initial concept change and grow over the years?
Yeah, so, I would find myself in a variety of social settings, work cocktail party, maybe an event at work, meeting new people in maybe a volunteer situation. And, invariably conversation would come up about, are you married? Are you dating anyone? These kinds of things. And whenever I would share, especially getting into my late 30s, that I was single, and as a matter of fact, had never been married and sometimes was not even dating anyone, I'd sort of get those inquisitive looks that kind of often morphed into, wow, I wonder what's going on there. Like, I wonder what the problem is. Like, why doesn't she have anybody in her life? What's going on? And as I started thinking about this, I never really felt like something was wrong, or that my single status is something to be solved, so to speak. And I just really kind of started thinking about that, and how could I talk about the the concept that I feel very passionate about of having a very full and whole life.
Mhm.
And so that is really kind of what sparked it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, so we're going to go into like the name of the book or the concept of the book. But one of the things that I find really interesting is you have this unique perspective on the word single
Hmm.
and seeing it as a whole number. And so, can
Yeah,
you elaborate on like what the book is about and the concept and how it became really the central theme for your book?
sure, I'd love to. Um, so again, kind of continuing on what I was just talking about. Um, I found that, and still find that when you talk about being single, it is really approached as a problem to be solved, something to be remedied. It's very rare that I kind of bump into somebody who, would gladly share that they are single and what they're, passionate about, and almost be proud of that, so to speak. I think that still is a bit unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And you know again, as I was writing this, I realized that single not only includes never been married, it could also be divorced.
Mhm.
It could also be widowed.
Mhm.
Um, for a long time, if you were gay, you were off unable to be married. That was kind of another category that I threw in there. Sometimes it just means you're in between dating, but nevertheless, I think single really that word covers all of those that status.
Mhm.
And I think of them more as seasons in our lives, another season. And I feel like I address a lot of these questions, in the book. And a real core part of it too is I really feel like I've found very meaningful ways to have very substantive and rich relationships in my life with men, adults, friends, children. That's sort of a whole other
Mhm.
thing you kind of get asked about. And I really kind of felt like, you know, um, there are these two paths, sort of apples and oranges, so to speak. And great, many people choose this one path, and I've kind of gone another way, and it's not less.
Correct.
It's not lacking. It's very whole and fulfilling and rich to me. Um, and so, and along those lines, I'm always really careful to say, wow, I am pro marriage. My parents were married for 63 years. I gleaned a lot of the benefits of that relationship. Both of my siblings married for years. Totally pro marriage, love it, but it's just not the path that I went down.
Right, right. And that's okay. Everybody has their own journey. And I think that the
Right,
respect and the support for that needs to be there. So, yeah.
right.
Hmm. So you held on to this idea um, for 15 to 20 years, thinking about a book, thinking about the questions that people ask you and the feelings and the journey kind of that you go through with that. And you experienced some frustration as you went to try to write earlier. And so, what do you think was the key factor that finally enabled you to move forward and start working on the book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it was really two things. One, the current guy that's in my life right now, his name is Ben, and I shared this concept with him, which ironically he totally loved and related to.
Mm.
And he said, "That is a great idea. You got to write that." And I said, "Yeah, I've been trying to." And he kept on me and on me and on me for about 6 months. When are you going to write that? When are you going to get started? So I finally said, "All right, be quiet. I'm going to figure this out." And I reached out to a friend who and actually she's become far more of a friend, but someone who I knew was a novelist who was doing writing. And I was like, Diane, I said, I got this concept and it's been clonking around in my head for a long time and I just can't seem to get anywhere with it. She writes me this great email back and she says, Betsy, if you trust me, I think that I have a class for you.
Mm.
And I was like, huh, that's intriguing. And I was hoping maybe for some consulting services. And she said, here it is. It's called Book in a Year. And I
Mm.
was like, huh. And she said, the whole concept is, and it begins on January 1st. I love it that she always starts this class on January 1st.
Mhm.
And I give some instruction and you're in a class setting with 8 or 9 other people. And by the end of the year, your book is well along the way, maybe finished, maybe done, but you've got the tools that you need to write a book.
Mm.
And I was like, what have I got to lose? Why not?
Mhm.
Because I was really, really struggling with this. And I think what I was struggling with is I have this idea, and every time I tried to write it, it felt very, very open mouth, insert my idea, and there was no storytelling in it. It was just sort of like writing a white paper opinion piece, and it was terrible. It sounded preachy. I just couldn't get off the ground with it. And if I'm going to be honest, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to communicate this in the written word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this class was really pivotal.
Wow. So tell me about the class. Like, what were the valuable aspects of the class, and how did the
Yeah.
structure of the class contribute to your progress?
Yeah. So it took place every other Saturday via Zoom
Mm.
for 3 hours. It was really fun too because it was people literally from all over the world.
Mm.
One woman was in France, as a matter of fact, and it was during COVID, so this was
Mm.
perfect. I actually started it. It was January 1, 2022,
Mm.
and Diane said, I'm gonna give you about 30 minutes of instruction, talk about concepts, but always in the class we're gonna dive right in to some writing. And oh, by the way, the second class, I hand out a schedule, and you will be on tap to present 10 pages to your
Wow.
classmates
Ooh.
within a few weeks. Okay, I say to myself. So, sure enough, that first class, and she did some wonderful introductory things. And I remember one of the first tasks was, and her prompts were always so good, but it was basically, you have 5 minutes right now. Share your passion about your project and what you want your reader to know.
Mm.
And that was kind of the first time that I really had to sort of put into words what I was trying to do. So the class, the structure of it, I mean, man, you had to show up every 2 weeks, and it was for 3 hours, and you also knew that there was this schedule on the horizon.
Mhm.
And I also want to say too, Diane is a master at understanding what a new writer especially needs in terms of encouragement. I have never met anyone who so understands about giving instruction coupled with encouragement and very specific rules, even about how we were going to critique one another's writing, and
Mm.
just an absolute, you know, master,
Mhm.
and so gifted in not only instruction and writing, but how to encourage writers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important because I'm a mentor, and so sometimes it's like you have some people that are like, great job, but that doesn't really tell the person like where to, like, it's not real feedback, and so you really need
Right,
that like prompting and encouragement, but also something that helps them improve. So that's really,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you described to me before we did this podcast about a meltdown
Yeah.
after the first class. So
Wow.
followed by a breakthrough uh,
Yeah.
in that morning writing circle. So can you describe
Yeah.
the meltdown experience, and then
Yep.
what led to the realization that your book was about good storytelling with a theme?
Yeah. So actually, I'm really happy to share this story. I think it's after the first class, and I am like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? I am completely overwhelmed, so overwhelmed that I write an email to Diane. I can't do this. I'm backing out. I don't want to do it. Blah blah blah.
Mhm.
So she says, hey, let's talk. And she sets up a Zoom call just like this one. She gets on, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's going to ask me all these demanding things, and all she says is, Betsy, what's going on?
Mhm.
So I kind of share how I'm feeling. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do this whole thing. And she said, just hang in there with me. She said, I want you to come to these morning writing circles, which were voluntary. This was another lovely thing that she offered
Mhm.
to her class throughout the year. Whenever she does these writing circles, she says, no charge,
Mhm.
join the writing circle if you want. And I was like, okay. Again, I'm kind of thinking, what do I got to lose? I might as well. So I joined the writing circle, and Diane already had, some knowledge of, my book and sort of a brief outline I had put to her. We're in the morning writing circle in front of like 25 people, and she said, "Betsy, this prompt is for you." And I'm like, "Oh boy." And the prompt was write about a neighbor. So I'm like, okay, okay. So I write this whole story about Mr. Cotman, who was the grandfather that I never had growing up across the street from me when I was 5 years old. And I write this whole story, and um, it's decent. It's pretty good, and I'm happy with the end of it. And then in frustration, in a one-on-one session with Diane, I'm like, what does this have to do with my book? And she goes, hold on. She says, I think this has a lot to do with your book. And I says, what do you mean? And she said, this is a story about unconditional love. This is a story about a man who, was committed to you and loved you for who you were. And she's talking. And I got to tell you, all of a sudden, I got it. It's like the floodgates came open. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is about storytelling, about learning to write compelling stories. And she's, as soon as she said this, she says, this is a theme of your book. This is a theme about how you really experienced so much wonderful, love from the relationship of your parents and Mr. Cotman. That's a real theme. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I kid you not, from that moment on, I was like on fire. It was really unbelievable. And I think within 3 months, I spit out about 40,000 words. Like, wow. Bam. It was just crazy.
Right.
And all of a sudden, these ideas popping up. I was developing, an outline. It was just really an amazing breakthrough.
Wow. So if we talk about storytelling, when we talk about your book, what is the central theme of your book, and how do you see the power of storytelling or how do you use it to convey it effectively?
Yeah, that's I really like that question. So, as the book has developed, it's really kind of in 5 sections. And the 5 sections are early childhood and expectations. Then I talk about questioning. Then I talk about launching, then landing, and kind of arriving at home fully into my centered self. And the book, in order to do compelling storytelling, you have to introduce characters. You have to, talk about the context of your life to the extent that it's going to have some meaning, to your reader, so they understand and see what's going on in relationships, how these things develop, how I, developed. And, again, when I look way back on how I was approaching, sort of telling this tale, I would just kind of, start rambling on about how I thought it was great to be single. Well, it's not really very meaningful to people unless they see you in the context of you dancing on the dance floor and how that's so fulfilling. Me becoming, and I almost called one section of the book Ant Power, AUNT, Ant Power, because I am so dedicated and committed to my 12 niece and nephews, and that is a huge part of my life. And you can't really understand how I'm living fully into that unless, well, you know something about my sister and brother and these children that they have and my relationship with them. So it was really kind of like learning to almost like take about 18 steps back and, introduce these characters. It's Mr. Cotman across the street and my grandmother and, my big sister who's 13 years older than me, which is really very significant that both of my siblings are older than me. And not to mention the fun I had telling some of the great dating experiences that I had. I mean, I've dated my entire life. I loved that, but it was like, well, was it really about committing to being with this great guy, or what's going on even in the context of those dating relationships? It's so fulfilling. What is it that's like, really kind of floating your boat? How can you describe this to people so that they understand it outside of the context of, well, why didn't you marry that guy? That's a very legitimate question, and I deal with that. So the compelling storytelling was also learning about how to, it's the old thing in writing, don't say it, show, don't tell. And I think, if I'm going to be honest, I was blessed by coming from a family of writers. My father was a textbook editor, and my sister is a journalist. Her husband is as well. And so I think this was kind of, locking into some percolating talents that I had there. But don't get me wrong, writing, wow, it is hard work.
It is.
It is hard work. It is by far probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but very satisfying.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, and I know you and I had talked about one of the groups of people who kind of show up as you talk to people about your experience of deciding to be single or not get married, I guess, is the group of mothers in their 50s. And so, how does the demographic of mothers in their 50s connect to your book, and what insights do you hope to offer them?
Yeah, it's funny. I think how I thought the moms of 50 might initially appreciate this book is I thought, for the people out there who are, divorced or experiencing being single, or, they've become widowed or whatever. But as it turns out, the really most passionate connection, and I kid you not, is this: man, I got to give that book to my daughter. and um and to me, that has been so confirming from the standpoint of, this is still kind of a thing, in terms of, I think there's still a pressure out there that this is the thing that society, I think, in general recognizes, you know, and also encourages in a rather kind of what's the word, demanding almost sort of way, like, this is a legitimate thing that you should be going for. And I think it's still really out there. And so this group of, women in their 50s, the first thing, and they'll say that, and they'll also say, man, I'm sure I'm going to be able to relate, to some of the things that you talk about in the book. And I'm like, yeah, there's that. But that, by and large, is really the first thing that they say is, man, I know somebody. And often, my daughter, I'd like to give it to them, but I know other people who I think will get something out of this. So
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it myself and passing it around. So that'll be great. So looking back on your entire journey of writing this book, what was the most challenging aspect, and then what was the most rewarding?
yeah, so I mentioned that I'm sort of an artist by nature, and one thing I've always known about myself, I I have never defined myself as a disciplined person, but I do look at myself as one who, man, when I decide to go for a project, like, I can get it done. A very disciplined friend of mine, as a matter of fact, I think recently said that to me when I was describing to her how I had stayed up all night crafting, like literally till 5:30 in the morning one day, because I was just passionate about this idea.
Yeah.
She could never do that. I am so appreciative and kind of in awe of how she's one of these people who, okay, from, 4 to 6 every day, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. It has not come together at all for that, in that manner for me. However, the passion, and the way I carry out and put my energy out into the world and how I accomplish things is very much how I've gone about this book. Even to the extent of, Diane also is my professional editor for the book. And man, when I finally turned in my first manuscript, I literally took like 6 months off. Like, whew, I just got to take a break from this, And so I think kind of the challenge was rather than beating myself up, like, okay, I'm not going to just write for 2 hours a day. You got to do it like you always do it, Betsy. So if that means that you decided to take a whole weekend to write, and by the way, you woke up at 2 in the morning and you had this great idea and you decided to write about it for 4 hours, well, that's just the way you're going to go about it. And it really is, the way that I've tackled tackled the project.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. Yeah. Do you have a name? So we haven't named the book. Do you have
yeah.
a name?
One thing I'm really proud of this title because it was the first thing that I actually landed on 20 years ago. And if I tell nobody, if I don't say anything about the book, but I just share the title, people usually get it. And the title is Single is a Whole Number.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
And I think it just speaks to, what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, I hope everybody here has been as moved as I am because I really want to become an author one day. But your dedication and the sheer tenacity that it took for you to bring your vision to life after so many years. It's a powerful reminder that ideas, no matter how long they simmer, they eventually find their perfect moment. So, for anybody inspired to learn more about the book, or to follow Betsy's work. You can find the links and information in the show notes. And really, just thank you for joining us. Remember that your own ideas, no matter how long they've been waiting, they're worth pursuing. And don't forget to subscribe and rate and review. And we'll catch you next time on The Turtle Optimist. Thanks,
Thanks
Betsy.
so much, Jenny.
Thank you.